10 days ago, I was in Miami filming race cars and indoor golf and all the sights and sounds of the city in between. This is not a travel video, but it's just an insight into what one working week in sport looks like. So my week was split into two main halves. The first half was the Formula E at the Hard Rock Stadium, and the second half was the TGL Indoor Golf League and all the kind of events that were happening around that. In between those two things, I was missioning around South Beach and some of the other touristy attractions to capture the atmosphere, the sights and sounds of Miami, which I needed for some of the recap assets for my client. Additionally, there was an event the one evening linked to Formula E, but with one of the partners. Usain Bolt was there, which was quite cool. So there was a lot happening. But that's roughly the schedule of the week. With Formula E, it's all about speed and spontaneity. Now, my client in Formula E is actually the tire supplier, which you would not suggest is your typical racing client when you think of content from motorsport. So I'm not filming for a team or for a driver. However, there's so many people involved in racing that there's also other people outside of just the driver and the teams that actually need coverage. And that doesn't mean I don't film the action though, because I still do. But in this case, I also film the tires, importantly, obviously, and all the activations and fan stuff that happens around that, because ultimately Hankook want to sell tires. There's specific interviews set at specific times that I need to film. There's press conferences that I need to keep on top of. There's sometimes VIP guests that I need to keep on top of and know where they all are at various times and stages. There's only certain times of the day where I'm allowed into the pit lane, for example, where I can cover the teams working on the cars, working with the tires, putting the tires on, etc. So there's a lot to keep on top of. One thing I always have with me at every race weekend is a to-do list. What do I need to film? What are some of the critical moments? When are they happening? At what time is the interview that I need to be there for? And so I'm constantly checking my watch and checking my to-do list to figure out what I can do when. And when do I have free time, for example, to head into the fan booth zone? When do I have free time to go into the pit lane? Etc. When do I have time to film some of my scenics? You're trying to build up a story for a race weekend, so there's a lot that you need to capture, and you need to figure out when you're going to do all those things. For example, in Miami, I wanted to capture the race start from the pit building, and that means leaving the grid early to make sure I get up onto the pit building early enough, because I wanted to have the fans of the main grandstand in the background of the start shot. And I think it ended up coming out quite cool. A bit more of like a scenic, artsy shot rather than raw action. Earlier in the day, I went and I checked where do I actually want to stand for the start of the race. So like I said, it's all the little things that you need to keep on top of and keep in mind when it comes to working at a live sport event. And that it's not just the track action itself that is important. The second big part of the week was the golf, where with Formula E, it was all about speed and spontaneity and flexibility. The golf was far more considered, slow, and precise. It was my first time actually ever filming golf, so that brought with a whole new set of challenges, trying to adapt my skills from something or a sport that's fast and high action and intense, to a sport that's overall far more slow, steady, and calm. And I think adapting some of those skills was a challenge to try and make something that is more relaxed in nature still feel visually interesting. On top of that, because this is an indoor golf event, you just have the added difficulty of indoor lighting, artificial lighting, constantly changing, flashing lights all the time, which can look cool, but can also be tricky when you're trying to adjust for white balance, and there's all sorts of different colors of lights in the room. And being in America, the frequency of the lights are also different, so you're battling with light flicker and trying to counter those kind of things. So the golf was much more about being measured and considered with my shots. And we had time before the match itself actually to film some of the guests and VIPs, which is the main reason I was there, playing themselves in this stadium, in this arena. It's basically a big warehouse, but it's really cool. We were able to cover all our bases there. but it was a stark contrast to the racing that came a few days before. And then the third part of this whole thing was all the stuff in between. There was an event on the first night, actually, with a partner of Formula E and Usain Bolt, which was on one of the skyscrapers in South Beach, which was really cool. But an extra event, an extra evening function that required planning and logistics outside of my normal race weekend. And then there was all the other sights and sounds of Miami at various times of day, ideally in the morning when the sun was out, sometimes at night with all the lights. And getting out into the city is actually such a great way of resetting your eye in a way and getting away from the pressured environment and the schedules and all the fast-moving things that are happening. Just a way to be creative and to notice things, colors, sounds, people, moments, compositions. So it's more about observing and less about chasing. But these are really important storytelling techniques or moments that help paint a complete picture of an event. So weeks like this really remind me that sports filmmaking is not just about the sport itself and the moment it's happening, but about so much more that goes on around it. And it's about adapting to different situations, to different environments, rhythms, and paces, while keeping the same mindset so that you can tell one complete, cohesive story.